Maybe because you also brought up the global nature of this question around, what is the intersection of energy technology and what are the opportunities, but also the risks. Maybe we can go a little bit deeper into the global nature, and all three of us really have seen this, I think, from a real global perspective and probably in different parts of the globe. Certainly coming from my perspective, having just been the president of Shell USA. There was a vast difference and continues to be a difference between, for example, what shareholders in the US will ask when I would meet with them versus shareholders in Europe, which would be very interested in ESG targets, sustainability targets, emission reduction targets. In the US, really, even since I was in that job for 7 years, really very little interest over the last 7 years. Now, I think with the current political environment in DC, even less interest. But what I will say is that both Shell and Mosaic, where I'm a director, we've continued to stay very committed to our sustainability goals, our emissions reduction goals, and look very strategically at our energy consumption and how that is going to be impacting our environmental footprint. And so while we may not be leading with that in the same way we were, it's still very much, happening. But I think, and then before I was with Shell, I actually was the CEO of a Danish oil and gas company, Maersk Oil and Gas. And in Denmark, this was almost the leading question when I would meet with the board, with my board then, or with investors is, what is, you're producing oil and gas in the Danish North Sea. This is terrible. And so, it really does have, I think, energy has a very different view, both by the public, but also by shareholders and key stakeholders, whether that's government or partners or communities where we live and work. So let's go a little bit deeper on the global nature of that, and maybe Chris, ask you to give some views, particularly from the perspective of you running, a big kind of new energy division in Chevron.
Yeah, it was a fascinating experience being in that role, and I joke that whenever I'm filling out a bio, where do you live? I live in Houston. I've been back in Houston now since 2020, but I really live on United Airlines planes and visiting all these different countries around the world, Gretchen. And it is really fascinating if you take a myopic or a narrow view, maybe just around the your local constituency or where you're based, you're going to miss really the big picture of how different countries, different stakeholders think about things differently. So you've got, I'll jump around and give a few different examples. You have countries that have just discovered hydrocarbons. Guyana is a good example. Suriname, they don't want to be left behind and not be able to monetize their
Sure.
resource, which many other countries have been doing in the Middle East, the U.S. for over 100 years. So that's a driver. Then you've got other countries that don't want to be on a hydrocarbon source from maybe a less than favorable actor. So that's driven a change in how they supply their energy. Then you've got others. It's interesting. Even some of the cleanest forms of energy. Let's pick nuclear is a good one to talk about. None of us are heavy in the nuclear business, but nuclear, if done well, very safe technology. But there are a couple of very serious incidents, and then people pivot away from that. But then that puts you backwards when you're thinking about being on a lower carbon source of energy. So I think you have to both keep the long view on where we need to keep the energy market moving over time, and sort of the mix of the energy, but then also accept the reality that the different stakeholders are going to have different perspectives about what to do in the here and now. Tej, maybe you can pick up on that.
Yeah, I do want to pick up on the one point you made about some of these, up and coming economies that have discovered fossil fuel reserves. We cannot go to them and tell them you can't use your resources. We cannot do that. They have a right to do the things that we've already done, and I fundamentally believe that. And I think that stems from, a little bit of, I think, a misconception around the energy transition and what it is. No one credible talking about the energy transition said it's the end of oil and gas. We know we need oil and gas. It has fueled civilization for a couple hundred years, and it's going to continue. The question is how much longer is it going to continue? I think that is a question that we don't really talk about very much. When I look at the global projections from various different sources, and we can quibble about the numbers, but they're in this sort of realm. 45 years left of natural gas at current production levels based on known reserves. Now there'll be other reserves out there as well. Okay, that's a generation away. Oil is not that much better than that. Coal is much longer than that. If those numbers are wrong, that's fine. But if they're only wrong by 20 years, we're still talking a generation or two before we have to transition the energy systems. So that is something that's going to play globally. And some countries are feeling that earlier than others. So you mentioned a couple, Chris. I think about Germany a lot. I mean, look at Germany. They turned off their nuclear plants. They were wholly reliant on Russia for natural gas, and they've got themselves into considerable trouble because of that. And they aren't blessed with an abundance of renewables. So their transition journey, their trajectory is going to be different than it is for the UK or for the US or for Canada. And I think we have to respect the fact that that journey is going to be different. I think that's okay. But it's a very, very dynamic world. I'm particularly concerned in how we in North America, and I'll say North America because I'm Canadian, right? So we're very close with you guys in the US, and hopefully we always will be. I think we need to be at the cusp in North America and developing these new technologies that are going to take over and really prompt energy in the future. We should be gaining that expertise, developing that technology, and exporting that expertise and that technology to the rest of the world as it goes through its transition journey. That's what I would really like to see. And that's also not what I'm seeing at the moment, which somewhat disappoints me. So I think we need to double down on that. We have lots of talent, lots of expertise. How do we actually utilize that to develop these technologies going forward? And there's many.
Yeah. No, thanks, Tej and Chris. And I think, just to pull out a few themes from what you just said, I think, first of all, we haven't used the word geopolitics yet, but geopolitics has such a huge role to play, and it's very unpredictable. It's very difficult to predict, what's going to happen if Russia turns off the taps or invades somewhere else, or, something happens in the Middle East that we're not expecting. And so the geopolitical risk is certainly something that I think in boardrooms, no matter what industry you're in, energy and technology for that matter, geopolitics will impact that. The other thing that Tej, I'll link to your sort of platform there you were standing on about technology and the role North America should play in technology advancement and acceleration. Our regulatory environment can really hinder that, or really support that and really, allow acceleration. And so I think we've seen a little bit of both, frankly, just over the last 5 years. And so also another key risk at a boardroom that would be good to be, a talking point, because you don't control the regulatory environment. Oftentimes it's unpredictable, but there are different ways as a company to impact that and influence that, whether that's through trade associations or direct lobbying, or the like. So I think I like the sort of different things we've pulled out there. I think we're giving some ideas to folks that might sit on boards, no matter what industry you're in, some interesting questions to ask there.